So before we start here, I want to ask you a question. Who's already using Swift 4 in their code bases? That's quite a bit. Who's still using Swift 2 and Xcode 7? I feel for you. So we are going to see some code bases migrate to Swift 4 soon, and other than that, we're already onto Swift 5. Swift being basically like an Apple product now that gets a release every year. And unlike all other Apple products that have some leaks a few months before they come out, Apple basically is just telling what we can expect from Swift 5, which is really cool, because that's basically allowing me to tell you what's coming up in Swift 5. Before we jump into that, I just recently started at Zing, which is a company in Hamburg in Germany, which is basically LinkedIn for the German market, working on not only the app, but also the continuous integration and all of that, which is pretty cool. Other than that, I'm doing a bit of open source, which is lacking a bit since I started working full-time. But I did a lot on Moya, which is a network abstraction layer written in Swift to enable you to write easier networking code, basically. And also a bit more interesting, I've been contributing to Swift Weekly Brief, which I will tell a bit more about later. It's a weekly update on everything happening in Swift. So that's probably also interesting if you are if you want to be like up to date on what's happening with Swift 5. Actually, JP also wrote an issue, so it's a pretty cool community, and yeah, we'll see about that. So API stability, that's basically the main goal of Swift 5, or like Apple saying like we want to do this now, and I can tell like Stop me if you've heard this one before, because I think at like Swift 2 or Swift 3, like Apple was saying like we want to introduce API stability and we want to get it done soonish, and then the whole open source thing happened, and it was such a great response, and they basically didn't have enough time to get the API stability done, but Swift 5's primary focus is API stability, so we can expect that now. It's pretty cool. Because this would remove the need for apps to distribute their own copy of the Swift libraries. And before you say like, oh, what's that supposed to mean? Well, it basically means that you don't have this big app with 8 megabytes of Swift library files. And the users will be happy because your app will be smaller and will just basically be in the system. But before we get there, there are some requirements that we still need to, or that Apple needs to tackle before we have API stability. There's some generic features in the standard library that still need to be implemented. This will probably not impact us, but it will impact Apple and is needed for the API stability. We'll talk about a little bit more about that later. Then we have API resilience, which basically means that we need to be able to change APIs without breaking the API. This will allow a library to basically evolve while maintaining a stable API. And then we have a memory ownership model, which is like Apple is saying like we want to tackle the memory ownership model, but when you really want to look into that and see what they actually mean is they want to tackle a bit of the memory ownership model just to get the API stability working. So let's talk a little bit more about the generic features in the standard library. There's two proposals that already have been proposed and accepted, and that's basically all that needs to be done to get that done. So the first one is conditional conformances, which will make it a bit easier to write some extensions where you have some complex or some more involved requirements to basically not add an extension on the whole type, but just when it conforms to some protocol, for example. Think about an array which you can just call hash value on, because now you would have to do that all by yourself. And it will basically clean up a bit of the standard library. And then we have recursive constraints on associated types, which is basically something that has been skipped for now because it was hard to implement or it had some quirky things that were hard to get working. We have a sequence here with an associated type of a subsequence, which itself is a sequence, which you can't really tell the compiler right now. So again, this is something that some people might benefit from just updating those lines of code and making it a bit more readable. But especially within the standard library, this is a big improvement. Then we have the memory ownership model. And this will make it, this means having better ownership or better memory management. It's partly implemented in Swift 4 already. You can look at the proposal. Basically, what we want to do is tackle everything for EI stability, like I said. And what this does, in the end, is it makes it impossible to modify a variable while it's being used or modified by another part of a program, which is most of the time not what you want, because then you can end up with some behavior or variable things that you don't expect. So about that memory ownership model, we have the law of exclusivity, which is it requires variables to be prevented from being simultaneously accessed in conflicting ways. For example, being passed in-out into different functions. This will allow library developers to have some time to adopt this. But more importantly, they will need some time to validate that these annotations that are needed are actually useful, which is also something I will talk a bit more about. Source stability is also a really important thing with Swift 5. We already saw that with Swift 4, because we don't want another Swift 2 to Swift 3. So we have source compatibility mode just like with Swift 4, and it will support Swift 4 and maybe also Swift 3. So for you that just still using Xcode 7, please update. So source stability guidelines are a bit stricter now. They really, if we want to change in the library or in the language, we need to really have proof that the current implementation actively causes problems for users. It needs to be clearly better and must not conflict with existing Swift syntax, and I'm not really sure what clearly better means, but we'll see that on the mailing lists. And it has to be a reasonably automated migration that's enabled for that change in the language. The migration system is now open source, so hey, we can probably expect to see that. And then a little bit more on Swift evolution, which is the evolution process where every change goes through. This will have some changes with Swift 5. Regarding proposals, we have a list of topics to focus on. We want to focus on some more string ergonomics, which basically makes it easier to use the string type. A lot has been done in Swift 4 already, but apparently there's some work to be done still. Improvements to existing standard library facilities. Yeah, basically just, for example, we had the talk from Charouche yesterday. We might expect some of those things to end up in the standard library, which would be pretty cool. Foundation improvements, which is a bigger topic, also pretty interesting, can also, again, have these same impacts as the existing standard library facilities. Syntactic additions, which is again a bit tricky because this will be like only syntactic and it will make the language harder and the bar is high, basically. And there's another interesting one, which is a typo, laying the groundwork for a new concurrency model. Explicitly, they have said like this is a non-goal to finish it, but Chris Latner actually wrote a big manifesto on one way of how we can maybe expect such a model. And maybe more, but we'll see. So in the current evolution process, you can just write a proposal and have it discussed on the mailing lists, and if it works, then it might get accepted and implemented afterwards. Now we will really need a working implementation, including test cases. And that's, after this, you're maybe like, wow, that's gonna be a lot that will be changed, and how can I keep up with this? I can give you some tips with that. Swift Weekly Brief, like I mentioned, it's a weekly newsletter every Thursday, and it will basically have a quick overview of everything happening in Swift open source. And there's also Swift Unwrapped, which is a podcast by Jesse Squires and JP, which we just saw, which is kind of connected to the Swift Weekly Brief, and it's a weekly 30-minute short podcast recapping super interesting stuff. They had an interview with Chris Latner recently, and it's, yeah, if you really if you're really interested in what's coming up, then definitely go follow these things. Thanks.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.
ABI stability. ABI stability. I know I should be aware of what this is, but can you please explain us again what this really means?
Well, I think the most important part is what I already touched, is like the really user-facing things, or developer-facing things as well, is that we don't have to include the Swift libraries with every app. This is basically why Swift apps are a bit bigger. It's about 10 or 8 to 10 megabytes, which is kind of significant, especially for smaller apps.
Yeah.
That happens basically when you just write one Swift file, and yeah, I think that's the most important thing for most people to know about it.
Agreed. It seems that Swift is evolving very quickly, and
I mean, every time we have a new Swift version, like 2, we are really looking forward to the 3, and then there's 3, you're looking forward to the 4, then we are looking for the 5, 5.1, and so on. So do you think that this will ever stop? I mean, we will ever have a version we will be content about, or it's just we are developers and we always want to be in the churn and always want to have new features and new stuff?
Yeah, that basically. Just like I said, like it's an Apple product, so just like the iPhone, I feel like we know that like, every single year you're like, yeah, I want an iPhone, but it costs a lot of money, and next year it's gonna be better, and that's the same thing with Swift. I mean that's good. Like it should improve every year, or it should keep improving, and I think it's a good thing if we want new things and improvements.
Yeah, we'll just spend $1,000 for Swift 6.
Yes, that's a good marketing decision.
And is it too late to jump into the Swift Evolution mailing list and try to influence the language? Do you think it's still time to like really understand how it works and try to influence the evolution, the next evolutions of the language?
Definitely, yeah. There's still like you can jump in. Like it's a big pit, but the people, especially the people at Apple as well, are really welcoming to the community and are really open for new contributors. You can even hit them up on Twitter and just ask any question, and they will gladly help you. So definitely, just if you're interested, dip your toes in whatever way you want, and you'll definitely see that you're welcomed and you can contribute. Yeah.
Yeah, it's surprising to have people from Apple that actually reply publicly to questions.
It's really cool.
Yeah, probably next year they will come to FrenchKit.
Maybe
Eventually.
they're actually like a
Yeah.
few of the Apple people at Swift are giving talks at conferences now, which is exciting.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
who knows? You should
Yeah.
try.
Yeah, we are actually targeting Geograph or ADQ.
Yeah.
ADQ could be funny. And does it cost you a lot of time to follow all that? It seems that it's a lot of material every week to read but you seems to be really aware of everything.
Yeah.
How much time do you spend?
Does take a bit of time, but like I said, you don't have to follow everything, and there's multiple ways to follow. Because I'm subscribed to some of the mailing lists, not all. I don't read everything because that's just impossible. I'm subscribed to the GitHub notifications for Swift Evolution, which is kind of doable because that's not too active. There's multiple ways you can follow, and you don't have to follow everything. And
it's hard to filter, actually, to really dig into that. And about people at Apple, the fact that Chris Latner left, did it change something? Did it?
Yes and no. I don't know, basically. But it's interesting that, at least for the concurrency model, he really went all in, basically, and wrote a big manifesto of really what he wants from it, or what's one possible way to tackle it. And I think he's still involved. And obviously, when he left, Apple knew for a while. So I think Swift is in good hands, even without Chris.
Let's hope Android moves to Swift. Anyway, I have another question about the new proposal system. Do you think it will reduce kind of the discussions and eternal debates that have been issuing on the mailing list?
It depends on the proposal, but I think it will help to at least make the impact better understandable. So we had the proposals to change the access modifiers, so the file private and the private, which was a real shit show after it had to be rolled back partially, and I think that's the main reason that they want to have an implementation and be able to better verify the impact. But other than that, I expect when there is a proposal, then people are gonna say maybe we can do this, maybe we can do this. That won't stop, but I expect there to not be any really big rollbacks anymore, which is a good start.
Awesome.
So
that's all.
thank you very much for this talk.
Thank you.